Stay with me here, because what I'm about to reveal is going to sound completely illogical, perhaps even absurd at first. But once you grasp the full picture, once you see the actual mechanics in motion, it will completely upend everything you think you understand about the Greenland crisis. President Trump is threatening tariffs against 8 European nations. He's invoking military force. He's declaring Greenland a matter of national security urgency. And his entire rationale, the fundamental argument he keeps hammering home again and again, is this: we must take Greenland before China does. We must control it. We must own it, because if we don't, Beijing will establish itself there, and America will forfeit the Arctic forever. That's the official story. That's what's saturating news coverage. That's what's being contested in Congress, debated at NATO headquarters, and protested in the streets of Nuuk. The United States must acquire Greenland to block China. But here's what almost nobody is discussing. Here's the dimension that should be keeping geopolitical analysts awake at night. China doesn't actually need Greenland. In fact, there's a substantial possibility that Beijing is observing this entire spectacle unfold and quietly celebrating. Because every action Trump takes to acquire Greenland might actually be strengthening China's position. I'm Dav. You're watching Hems Reports, and let me show you exactly why. Part 1. The official logic and why it sounds convincing. First, let's examine the stated reasoning. And to be fair, some elements are legitimate. Greenland occupies one of the most strategically critical locations on Earth. It's positioned directly between North America and Europe, straddling what military planners call the G-Uke Gap, the maritime corridor connecting Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. During the Cold War, NATO forces utilized this passage to monitor Soviet submarines entering the North Atlantic. Today, as Russian and Chinese naval operations expand in Arctic waters, that surveillance capability has become more vital than ever. Greenland also hosts Patuxent Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, a critical installation for American missile defense and space monitoring systems. The United States has maintained military operations there since World War II under agreements with Denmark. It forms part of America's early warning architecture against ballistic missile threats. Then there are the resources. Greenland contains massive deposits of rare earth elements, the minerals essential for everything from consumer electronics to electric vehicles to advanced weapons platforms. The island holds an estimated 1.5 million metric tons of rare earth reserves, including heavy rare earths like dysprosium and terbium that are particularly valuable for high-temperature magnets. China currently dominates global rare earth markets, controlling approximately 90% of processing capacity. So the argument follows: if America controlled Greenland, we could break that Chinese monopoly. And finally, there's the Arctic itself. Climate change is opening new shipping corridors through Arctic waters. The Northern Sea Route, which follows Russia's northern coastline, can reduce transit time between Asia and Europe by up to 2 weeks compared to traditional routes through the Suez Canal. As ice continues retreating, projections suggest the Arctic could become navigable year-round within decades. Control over Arctic territory means control over these emerging trade arteries. All of this sounds strategically sound on paper. Prime location, military infrastructure, critical minerals, shipping lanes. Classic geopolitical positioning. America secures Greenland, China loses access. Problem solved. Except that's not remotely how it functions. Not even close. Part 2. The rare earth illusion. Let's start with the rare earth argument, because it's the one that sounds most persuasive. China controls rare earth markets. Greenland has substantial rare earth deposits. Therefore, America needs Greenland to break Chinese dominance. Simple, right? Wrong, and here's why. First, rare earths aren't actually rare. The name is deeply misleading. These minerals exist throughout the world, including within the continental United States. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, American rare earth reserves stand at approximately 1.9 million metric tons. Greenland's estimated reserves are 1.5 million tons. America already possesses more. The challenge isn't locating rare earths. The challenge is processing them. Extracting rare earth elements is extraordinarily difficult and environmentally devastating. For every ton of rare earths extracted, you generate roughly 2,000 tons of toxic waste. It's a dirty, expensive, complex operation requiring specialized facilities, rigorous environmental controls, and massive capital investment. China doesn't dominate rare earth markets because they monopolize the minerals. They dominate because they constructed the processing infrastructure, accepted the environmental consequences, and undercut competitors by subsidizing the industry for decades. It was a calculated strategic choice that began in the 1980s and 90s when Western nations decided processing rare earths wasn't worth the environmental and economic burden. Now here's where it gets fascinating. Even if America acquired Greenland tomorrow and immediately launched mining operations, which, by the way, would require at least a decade to become operational, where do you think those raw materials would be sent? To China for processing. Because China has the facilities, China has the technical expertise, China has the established supply chains. Building equivalent processing infrastructure in the United States or Greenland would require tens of billions of dollars and many years of development. Multiple industry specialists interviewed by CNBC called the entire rare earth justification for Greenland absurd for precisely this reason. Mining Greenland doesn't alter China's strategic leverage because the minerals still require Chinese facilities for refining. So the first pillar of the argument disintegrates under examination. Acquiring Greenland doesn't resolve the rare earth problem. It might not even improve it. Part 3. The Arctic routes that don't go through Greenland. Now let's discuss Arctic shipping lanes, because this is where geography becomes critically important, and where many people, including apparently some officials in Washington, fundamentally misunderstand how the map actually works. Multiple potential routes exist through the Arctic. The two most significant are the Northern Sea Route and the Northwest Passage. The Northern Sea Route follows Russia's northern coastline, running from the Barents Sea in the west to the Bering Strait in the east. It's approximately 5,600 kilometers long and remains within Russian territorial waters for most of its length. The Northwest Passage, conversely, runs through the Canadian Arctic archipelago, passing north of Canada and Alaska. This route does approach Greenland's waters more closely. But here's the critical detail. China has invested heavily in the Northern Sea Route, not the Northwest Passage. In September 2025, China successfully completed its first commercial container ship voyage along the Northern Sea Route with the vessel Istanbul Bridge. That journey took 26 days from China to Europe, roughly half the time required via the Suez Canal. China calls this the Polar Silk Road and has signed extensive cooperation frameworks with Russia to develop it. Russia controls the Northern Sea Route. Russia charges transit fees. Russia provides icebreaker escorts. Russia establishes the regulations, and China has accepted this arrangement because it serves their strategic interests. The route cuts directly across the top of Siberia, nowhere near Greenland. Even if the United States owned Greenland outright, it wouldn't provide Washington any meaningful authority over the shipping route China actually prioritizes. The Northwest Passage through Canadian waters would still primarily be a Canadian jurisdiction matter, and Canada is already a NATO ally. So acquiring Greenland doesn't obstruct China's Arctic ambitions in any practical sense. The routes they're developing don't transit Greenlandic waters. The infrastructure they're constructing is in partnership with Russia, not Denmark. This is like claiming you need to purchase your neighbor's house to prevent someone from using the highway 3 blocks away. The logic simply doesn't connect. Part 4. What China actually tried in Greenland, and what stopped them. Let me be explicit about what China's actual interests in Greenland have been. Chinese companies have attempted to invest in mining ventures there. Shanghai, a Chinese rare earth corporation, became the second largest shareholder in the Kvanefjeld mine project in southern Greenland. That project was supposed to become one of the world's largest rare earth and uranium mines. But here's what happened. Greenland's parliament passed legislation in 2021 prohibiting uranium mining, which effectively terminated the Kvanefjeld project because uranium and rare earths occur together in that geological deposit. The Chinese investment was blocked, not by American military force, not by traditional diplomatic pressure, but by local environmental regulations and democratic decision-making within Greenland's autonomous government. Chinese investors also attempted to acquire the Tan Breeze mining project. U.S. officials reportedly lobbied intensively to prevent that sale, and eventually the project was purchased by an American company, Critical Metals Corporation, for reportedly far less than Chinese firms had offered. So Chinese attempts to gain direct access to Greenland's mineral wealth have already been frustrated through diplomatic and economic instruments, not military ones. And these measures were achieved while Greenland remained a Danish territory and NATO ally. The pattern here is significant. Greenland's autonomy and its relationship with democratic Western institutions have proven effective barriers against unwanted Chinese influence. Local opposition to large-scale mining, environmental concerns, and NATO security considerations have all functioned to limit Chinese penetration. None of this required the United States to threaten tariffs, alienate European partners, or contemplate military force. The system was working. Part 5. The Paradox: How Pursuing Greenland Actually Helps China. Now let's discuss what happens if the U.S. attempts to take Greenland. This is where we encounter the paradox. The question isn't whether acquiring Greenland would benefit America. The question is whether it would benefit China. And the answer I'm about to present is yes, potentially enormously. Let's examine what's actually happening right now, in real time, as Trump pursues this Greenland acquisition strategy. First, NATO is fracturing. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has stated explicitly that if the United States attacks Greenland, it would signify the end of NATO. European leaders have issued joint statements expressing profound alarm. 8 countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, are now facing U.S. tariff threats unless they support America's acquisition of Greenland. Consider what this means for China. For decades, one of Beijing's primary strategic challenges has been NATO's cohesion. The alliance represents the combined military and economic power of the United States and Europe operating in coordination. It's a formidable obstacle to Chinese ambitions across multiple regions. China has struggled to drive wedges between America and Europe, to create divisions, to weaken the alliance's effectiveness. And now the United States is doing it for them. By threatening allies, by imposing tariffs on partners, by suggesting military force against a NATO member's territory, Trump is accomplishing what Xi Jinping never could. He's transforming America's closest allies into adversaries. Every European defense minister who now must explain to their parliament why they should continue trusting American security guarantees. Every German business leader questioning whether economic ties with the U.S. are reliable. Every French voter wondering whether NATO serves their interests. That's strategic gold for China. Second, this Greenland crisis is consuming enormous American political capital and attention. Congress is debating it. The White House is fixated on it. Defense officials are planning for it. Diplomats are managing the fallout. Media coverage is dominated by it. Meanwhile, what's happening in the South China Sea? What's the status of Taiwan? What about Chinese influence operations in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia? What about Beijing's technological advances, their military modernization, their strategic partnerships? The more time and energy America spends on Greenland, the less focus exists on issues that actually threaten Chinese interests. It's a massive distraction wrapped in a national security justification. Third, let's talk about money. Estimates for purchasing Greenland range from $500 billion to $700 billion. Even the low end of that spectrum represents an astronomical expenditure. For context, the entire annual U.S. defense budget is approximately $800 billion. Where does that money go? To Denmark, presumably. And what doesn't it go toward? Everything else. Infrastructure in the United States, shipbuilding for the Navy, hypersonic missile development, cyber defense capabilities, semiconductor manufacturing, all the actual tools of strategic competition with China. Even if Greenland were free, the cost of developing it would be staggering. The infrastructure barely exists. There are no rail connections linking mining sites to ports, no deep water facilities capable of accommodating large commercial vessels in most locations, no power grid sufficient for industrial-scale operations. Constructing all of that in Arctic conditions, on mountainous terrain, with limited labor availability would cost hundreds of billions more. That's capital not spent countering China where it actually matters. Fourth, and this might be the most important dimension, acquiring Greenland through intimidation, threats, or force fundamentally undermines America's soft power advantage. One of the key distinctions between the United States and China on the global stage has been that America is perceived as a defender of international law, sovereignty, and rules-based order, while China is increasingly viewed as an aggressive expansionist power willing to disregard international norms when convenient. That perception matters profoundly. It's why countries in Southeast Asia seek American military partnerships even while maintaining economic relationships with China. It's why European nations, despite economic dependence on Chinese trade, align with American strategic priorities. It's why smaller nations trust American security commitments. But what happens when the United States threatens military action against an allied democracy's territory? When Washington imposes economic coercion to force territorial transfers? When an American president suggests that might makes right in international affairs? The narrative flips. Suddenly, China can point to American behavior and declare, see, they're no different than us. They claim to support sovereignty and international law, but only when it serves them. Beijing has already started making precisely this argument. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning stated the U.S. should not pursue its own interests by using other countries as a pretext. China's state media has been highlighting the hypocrisy. America condemns Chinese actions in the South China Sea while threatening to seize Allied territory in the Arctic. Every country observing this situation is recalculating. If the United States is willing to pressure Denmark, a loyal NATO ally, what does that signal for other partners? Can American security commitments be trusted? Are there boundaries to how far Washington will go? Part 6. The independence dynamic nobody's discussing. Here's another layer most analysis completely misses. Greenland is pursuing independence. The island has been self-governing since 2009, with the constitutional right to declare independence through referendum. Independence from Denmark is a major political priority within Greenland. If Greenland becomes independent while remaining aligned with the West, it's actually a superior outcome for American interests than annexation. An independent Greenland could maintain close security cooperation with the United States through bilateral agreements similar to what the U.S. maintains with many Pacific Island nations. It could host American military installations, it could coordinate on Arctic security, and it could accomplish all of this while maintaining legitimacy in international forums. But Trump's aggressive approach is poisoning that possibility. Greenlanders are not interested in becoming Americans. Polls demonstrate overwhelming opposition to U.S. acquisition. Protests in Nuuk have featured signs explicitly rejecting American control. The Premier of Greenland, Mute Borup Egede, has stated unequivocally, "Greenland is ours. We are not for sale and will never be for sale." The more pressure the United States applies, the more Greenlanders will resist any form of American involvement, even cooperative partnerships that would genuinely serve mutual interests. And if Greenland's path toward independence becomes complicated by American antagonism, if the process gets delayed or derailed, who benefits? Potentially China, because an unsettled, disputed status for Greenland creates exactly the kind of ambiguity that Beijing can exploit, not through direct control, but through economic influence, through supporting independence movements as a counterweight to American pressure, through offering investment that desperate governments might accept. Part 7. What Beijing is actually thinking. Imagine you're a strategic planner in Beijing. You've been working for years to counter American influence in the Arctic. You've been attempting to weaken NATO. You've been trying to distract Washington from your activities in Asia. You've been constructing narratives about American imperialism to undermine U.S. soft power globally. And then Donald Trump announces he wants to buy Greenland. Better yet, he threatens military force. Even better, he imposes tariffs on European allies who resist. The European Union is now holding emergency meetings discussing how to respond to threats from their supposed protector. Denmark's prime minister is warning about the end of NATO. German, French, and British officials are questioning American reliability. Do you intervene? Do you attempt to stop it? Or do you sit back and let it unfold? From Beijing's perspective, Trump pursuing Greenland accomplishes multiple strategic objectives without China having to expend any effort. The Atlantic Alliance is fracturing. American resources and attention are diverted. The rules-based international order that constrains Chinese behavior is being undermined by American actions. Washington's reputation as a trustworthy partner is collapsing in real time. Why would China want to prevent that? In fact, there's a compelling case to be made that China should be actively encouraging it, though of course, they'd never say so publicly. Behind closed doors, Chinese officials might be thrilled. Every day this continues. Every escalation, every tariff threat, every strained diplomatic exchange serves Beijing's interests. Part 8. The alternative strategy that would actually work. Here's what's particularly frustrating about this entire situation. There was, and still is, a pathway for the United States to secure its interests in Greenland without any of this chaos. The United States already maintains a military presence at Pituffik Space Base. That presence could be expanded through negotiations with Denmark and Greenland. The base could be upgraded. Additional facilities could be constructed, all with the consent and cooperation of both governments. American companies can already invest in Greenland's mining sector. The Greenland government has been actively seeking Western investment to develop its resources and infrastructure. They want partnerships with democratic allies. An American mining company, Critical Metals, already owns the Tanbreeze rare earth project. The U.S. Export-Import Bank is considering a $120 million loan to fund it. All of this happened through normal economic channels. Greenland needs investment to achieve independence from Danish subsidies. Denmark sends approximately $600 million annually to Greenland, covering roughly half the island's budget. Mining, tourism, and other industries require development. That demands capital, technical expertise, and infrastructure. The United States could have been Greenland's partner in that development. Washington could have offered comprehensive investment packages, technical assistance, infrastructure development, security cooperation, all framed as supporting Greenland's democratic governance and eventual independence. That approach would have secured American interests, countered Chinese influence through positive engagement rather than threats, strengthened the Atlantic Alliance, and maintained America's reputation as a supporter of sovereignty and democracy. Instead, we received tariffs, threats, and discussion of military force. Part 9. What this reveals about American strategy. This isn't just about Greenland. It's about a pattern in how American foreign policy under Trump conceptualizes power and competition with China. There's an assumption that every geopolitical challenge is zero-sum. That territory equals power. That acquisition and control are the primary instruments of statecraft. It's a 19th century view of international relations applied to 21st century challenges. Modern strategic competition doesn't function that way. China's influence in Africa isn't built on owning African territory. It's built on investments, infrastructure projects, trade relationships, and diplomatic engagement. The Belt and Road Initiative isn't about colonizing countries. It's about creating dependencies, shaping preferences, and building influence through economic integration. China understands that in the contemporary world, you don't need to own Greenland to benefit from its resources. You just need access, which can be secured through contracts, investments, and relationships with whoever does control the territory. Meanwhile, the United States is threatening a military takeover that would be illegal under international law, would violate NATO's founding principles, and would accomplish little even if successful, because the practical challenges of developing Greenland would remain unchanged. Part 10. The scenarios ahead, none of them good. So where does this leave us? What happens next? Several scenarios are possible, none of them favorable for American interests. Scenario 1. The Trump administration continues pursuing Greenland aggressively. Relations with European allies deteriorate further. NATO's cohesion weakens. China capitalizes on the division. America either succeeds in acquiring Greenland at enormous financial and diplomatic cost, gaining minimal strategic value, or fails after expending all that political capital. Either way, Beijing wins. Scenario 2. The administration backs down from the Greenland Initiative, but the damage is already done. European allies have been alienated. Trust has been shattered. The perception of American foreign policy as erratic and unreliable solidifies. Again, China benefits from reduced confidence in U.S. partnerships. Scenario 3. Some kind of middle ground solution emerges. Perhaps an expanded security agreement or investment partnership that doesn't involve transfer of sovereignty. But given how confrontational the initial approach has been, even reaching that outcome would require significant diplomatic repair work and might not restore the previous status quo. In all three scenarios, China emerges ahead relative to where they were before Trump started discussing Greenland. That's the paradox. The harder the United States pushes to acquire Greenland specifically to counter China, the more it actually advantages China's strategic position.